shockwaves in the church world. The courtroom was silent when the jury returned with its verdict. After months of testimony, countless witnesses, and a mountain of evidence, Pastor James Randolph, once hailed as a man of faith and moral authority, was officially declared guilty. The crimes were not financial fraud, nor mere abuse of power within his congregation, but something far darker, something that would shake the very foundation of trust placed in him. The guilty verdict exposed not just a criminal act, but a lifetime of carefully hidden secrets involving the exploitation of children, the manipulation of vulnerable families, and the abuse of sacred trust. For decades, Randolph stood at the pulpit preaching about morality, family values, and righteousness. He was a familiar face in church broadcasts, a guest speaker at religious conventions, and a counselor to troubled souls who believed he could guide them with spiritual wisdom. But behind the polished smile and the booming sermons lay a predator who used his position not for service, but for control. Now, as the gavel struck and the word guilty echoed through the halls of justice, the mask was finally torn away. This was not just the downfall of one pastor. It was a moment that forced the faithful to confront a brutal truth: evil can hide in robes of righteousness, and wolves often walk among the flock disguised as shepherds. The story of James Randolph is not only about one man's crimes, but about decades of silence, complicity, and the pain of countless victims who were told to stay quiet in the name of protecting the church. Who was Pastor James Randolph? The public image versus reality. To many, Pastor James Randolph was a symbol of stability. Born into a devout Christian family in the 1960s, he grew up in a small southern town where church life was central to the community. From an early age, Randolph was praised for his speaking ability, his charisma, and his apparent devotion to Scripture. By his mid-20s, he had already begun leading small Bible study groups, eventually climbing the ladder of influence until he founded his own ministry. His church grew rapidly, attracting hundreds and then thousands of members. He cultivated an image of the perfect pastor, disciplined, eloquent, deeply spiritual, and always surrounded by youth programs that seemed to give children and teenagers a safe place to grow. Parents entrusted their sons and daughters to Randolph's leadership, believing his ministry offered shelter from the dangers of the outside world. But that public image was carefully staged. Behind closed doors, whispers began to circulate. Some children became withdrawn after spending time alone with the pastor. Certain parents raised quiet concerns about the unusual amount of attention he gave to specific young members of the church. Yet these concerns were brushed aside, dismissed as misunderstandings or even slander against a man of God. For Randolph, his image was everything. He dressed impeccably, always speaking with authority, always ready with a scripture verse to silence critics. His life was a performance, and the stage was the pulpit. What no one knew then was that the very platform that elevated him was also the shield behind which he hid his crimes. The first cracks in the image. The first serious allegations surfaced more than a decade ago. A teenage boy, then 16, confided in a church elder that Pastor Randolph had crossed boundaries during a private counseling session. The elder, shocked but unwilling to bring scandal upon the church, advised the boy to pray about it and warned him not to make accusations without proof. That moment of dismissal silenced the victim, who carried his trauma in isolation for years. Other stories emerged sporadically. A young girl who avoided eye contact with the pastor, a boy who refused to attend youth retreats after being alone with him, a parent who found disturbing messages exchanged between Randolph and their child. Each incident was handled quietly, swept under the rug in the name of protecting the church's reputation. For years, Randolph remained untouchable. His sermons grew more dramatic, his congregation more loyal, and his influence more widespread. The louder the whispers grew, the more he preached about the attacks of the devil on his ministry, framing himself as a victim of jealousy and lies. His followers believed him, fiercely defending their pastor against what they saw as baseless rumors. But secrets never stay hidden forever. The victims speak. Silent voices come forward. The turning point came when multiple victims, now adults, decided to break their silence. Empowered by growing awareness around child abuse scandals in other institutions, they found the courage to step forward. Their testimonies painted a horrifyingly consistent picture: private counseling sessions that turned inappropriate, youth retreats where boundaries were crossed, late-night phone calls where Randolph manipulated and groomed vulnerable teens. One victim, now in his 30s, recalled, "He told me I was special, chosen by God, and that I shouldn't tell anyone what happened because people wouldn't understand. For years I believed him. I thought keeping quiet was protecting the church, but all it did was protect him." Another woman, who was only 13 at the time of her abuse, described how Randolph convinced her that their encounters were spiritual bonding, twisting scripture to justify his actions. The trauma followed her into adulthood, leaving scars that therapy and time could only partially heal. As more voices joined the chorus, it became impossible to deny. What had once been rumors now stood as undeniable patterns of abuse. The law finally intervened, launching an investigation that would uncover decades of misconduct carefully hidden behind sermons and Bible verses. Courtroom drama. The day of the guilty verdict. The trial of Pastor James Randolph was nothing short of a national spectacle. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, former congregants, and victims who had long waited for justice. Prosecutors presented a chilling case, testimonies from victims spanning over 2 decades, records of inappropriate communications, and evidence of systematic grooming. Randolph, dressed in his customary dark suit, sat stoic for most of the proceedings. His defense team argued that the accusations were exaggerated, that the victims had been manipulated by media frenzy, and that Randolph was the target of a witch hunt against religious leaders. But the sheer consistency of the victims' accounts, combined with damning evidence, dismantled those arguments one by one. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict, the atmosphere was electric. Some victims wept openly. Others sat in silence, processing the weight of the moment. For them, it was more than a legal victory. It was validation after years of being silenced, ignored, or disbelieved. Randolph showed little emotion as the judge read the sentence. For a man who once commanded thousands from the pulpit, the reality of spending the rest of his life behind bars seemed almost surreal. His ministry crumbled overnight, his followers scattered, and his name forever etched in history not as a man of God, but as a predator who used faith as his weapon. A lifetime of secrets, what investigators uncovered. When investigators began digging into Randolph's history, they were stunned by the scale of what they found. For years he had built a system designed to keep victims silent and to protect himself from exposure. He used his authority as a pastor to intimidate and control, often warning victims that God would punish them if they spoke out. He manipulated parents into trusting him completely, convincing them that private sessions with their children were necessary for spiritual growth. Beyond testimonies, investigators found journals, letters, and encrypted files on Randolph's personal computer that revealed a chilling obsession with control. There were detailed notes about certain children in the church, including their family, situations, vulnerabilities, and even suggestions on how to gain their trust. It was as if he had kept a playbook of manipulation, crafted over decades. Financial records also showed suspicious payments to families who later refused to cooperate with law enforcement. These donations were framed as acts of generosity, but prosecutors argued they were hush money. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Randolph's life was not a sudden fall from grace, but the exposure of a lifetime built on deception and abuse. Church leadership's response: complicity or ignorance? One of the most controversial aspects of the scandal was the role of the church leadership. Could it really be possible that no one knew? Investigators revealed that several elders and staff members had heard concerns over the years but chose to remain silent. In some cases, complaints from parents were redirected, minimized, or outright